Welcome to the HIT Podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we're dropping into your feed with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations going on in the space of human resources, insurance, and technology. This week's episode will be no exception. Very excited to bring my guest on. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, sir. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Toby. I'm glad to be here with you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So let me just ask you real quick to give the audience kind of the quick overview of who's Jeff, how do you get in the chair today?
Jeff is retired, so believe it or not, this is went to work with 6 Seconds. It was supposed to be my retirement gig. I was with FedEx and Human Resources for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And then Josh pulled me out of retirement. I told him I'd help him, and then it became full time. And then we're growing the company. So I actually am over the chief revenue officer for 6 Seconds and work with our sales team and work with a lot of our large corporate customers and head up a lot of the new material, the new development. So yeah,
What
that's
is 6 Seconds?
6 Seconds is the emotional network. We're trying to reach 1 billion people practicing emotional intelligence
Yeah.
in the world. And we have corporate, private, client. We're kind of transverse in all markets there.
Yeah, and when you say emotional intelligence, maybe unpack that. What do you guys mean by that? What do you see? How do you help in that arena?
Emotional intelligence, there's, lots of definitions. Everybody's got a definition of emotional intelligence. In 6 Seconds, our model kind of focuses around know, choose, and give. And we kind of look at the know side of, do I have self-awareness? Do I have self-understanding? How does that come across? Do I recognize my own patterns? Do I do anything to help myself be a better person and develop? And then the choose side is, how do I do in relationships? How do I value relationships? Do I understand consequential thinking? Am I intrinsically motivated? How does that show out every day? And then the give is more what is your noble goal? How do you do with empathy? How do you help others? How do you respect others' feelings? So that's kind of what our model is based off of, that know, choose, and give. And it's in a circle. So you can kind of move around the dial there and see, where do I need to be at that moment to have the best application of all of that?
Yeah, and how do you help people develop that?
Wow. That's a really good question.
That's my job.
We Yeah, good one. You're good at it. We do it through a lot of relationship, but we also are data driven. We're a data driven company. We're a global company. We're also, we like to give you information. So we have a lot of different assessments that you could take that kind of is you assessing you. We have 360 tools where it's your self-assessments, leadership assessments, and then the other assessments that you may want to include. So that gives you more of the holistic view. And then we have individual assessments or team assessments and then organizational assessments. So now we can not only look at how are the individuals working, how are the teams working, but what's the culture they're working in. So we have all of these tools out there. We do a lot of individual coaching. We do executive coaching. We work with schools building educational programs. We do a lot of impact work with youth. We have a lot of programs that we do, and some of our bigger clients are UNICEF, the World Hunger Day, um, Environment for Social Change, Environment for Climate Change, and working with a lot of youth to bring them around and really do impact with trying to help them make a better future.
That's amazing. That's really awesome, and what a great organization. When you do go in and work with companies, talk to me about how it looks like when you work with individuals and when you work with teams. Like, how does that differ? How does that look?
Yeah, with the individuals, it's a lot of self-awareness and trying to make them understand this is who you really are. And when we look at our assessment tools, one of the things I like doing working with individuals is this is you evaluating you. You can fool other people, but when you take this self-assessment, this is you putting yourself on the scale of weights and balances. So that's a real deep conversation of, you yourself grade yourself as low in empathy. Why is that? Why
Mhm.
do you struggle with that? As a self, to share something about me, I am not an empathetic person. I wish I was. It's very innate for some people. It's just that's not who I am. So empathy is a learned skill. And the great thing about it is I've been practicing this, and I'd say practicing for about 20 years, and I'm still learning the skills that make me a better empathetic person, a better empathetic listener. But when the individually, it's really that track of what do I want to work on specifically. With teams, it's really what the leader wants to work on. But more importantly is how do the others see that I need to work on things? What are their opinions? Do they think I'm empathetic? Do they think that I have the ability to help them? A lot of the feedback we get for teams now is raising that awareness for the leader of how many people can you help? And
Yeah.
then we turn the mirror and say, you know what? You can equally hurt that many people also if you're not aware of both sides of the coin.
Yeah. Wow. That's heavy. It's a really interesting thought. Where do you see people maybe having like aha or kind of do most people have a decent sense of themselves, do you find, or
Whew, that's a tough question. I would say most people do. And I would say some that don't have a healthy, it may be a choice. Maybe I don't want to dive into that side. Maybe I'm happy with who I am. Maybe this is where I feel I need to be. And that's totally a valid conversation or a valid thought or a valid way to live your life. It's everyone's choice to do that. Most people do have the ability to want to help others. I just think it's the human nature is really not a destructive nature. Even though there are occurrences that happens, I think as a whole, we really have an understanding for others and do care. I think our history and our lives today just indicate that's really the case. So yeah, I think there is a lot of self-awareness out there.
yeah, and I think I obviously you've mentioned some of your tools and when people hire you sort of formally and officially, but maybe just to kind of give the listener a nugget here, what would you say to a leader out there that's listening going, gosh, I hope I could be better for my team. What are some things that they can hear today and maybe know or implement?
Yeah, if you're a professional, there are a lot of key indicators that we say are soft skills. We hear that a lot about emotional intelligence. We hear that a lot about other areas. Well, that's a soft skill. Well, with emotional intelligence, if you've got kind of a toxic culture, there are key indicators that hit your bottom line. What's your turnover rate? If you're a leader or an HR professional, if you have a very high turnover rate, that's probably an indicator that you've got a culture issue. So if you want to look at turnover, how are you affecting that? If you're a leader and you have struggles with collaboration, it could be a silo mentality. It could be, not setting the example of, you know what, we are an open-minded organization. We're open to thought. Now, that doesn't mean you agree with everything or it has to be just everyone moving in lockstep, but it does mean you allow for other opinions. In a lot of businesses, we have diversity of cultures, diversity of ideas, diversity of leadership styles. If you're tend to be a leadership style that's a pace setting, really moving the ball, going fast, maybe you want somebody that's more of a strategist or someone that's more of a sage type leadership styles, which those are kind of the indicator styles in our profile that can say, you know what, are we moving too fast? Do we take a pause? Do we gather the information? Not that they want to stop it, but make sure they've got everything covered along the way. So, as a leader in an organization or an HR organization, having the ability to ask the right questions, but then having the data that indicates that it is making a difference when you make those choices is really critical.
And what's the timeline on this type of work?
Wow. It varies. If you're talking with an organization, you have a much longer timeline. And usually when we take the organizational, we call it organizational vital signs, it's directional. What do we anticipate the next year will look like? So what we do is try to set out a plan that works from the top down. Okay, leaders of the organization, what do you see? What can you commit to? And then we start the communication that filters down to the front line. That usually takes about a year. With groups, it's usually we like to retest after 6 months and just see if a couple of the key indicators are moving in the right directions. For individuals, usually 90 days. We feel like it's more intense, it's more focused coaching. There's usually not as many things as you want to touch on. You want to take, hey, let's turn up where your strengths are and let's make sure You're not overusing those, but actually taking time to develop some of those gaps that you have. So probably 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, individual, team, and then organization.
Yeah, and maybe to make this feel a little bit more real, can you talk to me about maybe some success stories or some events that you guys have seen?
Yeah, I can just share with you my time at FedEx. I was actually in what they call their Leadership Institute in 2004. At the time, FedEx leadership was struggling with consequential thinking. They had some low empathy scores, and we intentionally went out and looked at the marketplace at that time and said, what is a data-driven organization that we can actually put in place and work with to change these. So in 2004, FedEx and 6 Seconds entered to agreement to actually start using their assessment tool at the manager level. And then we changed our leadership training to really work with this type of engagement with empathetic listening. We did a part of the leadership education was how do you ask questions differently? How do you go from you know, an area of where you're already always having the answer to really saying, are there other answers? Do I really know your opinion? But FedEx really went to that. How do we engage everybody at the level where they need to be engaged? How do we respect people at those levels? And we actually took that from the front level course of managers, worked it all the way through the senior managers, and then we onboarded the LVSs and the other assessments with our higher levels, and it just created an organizational change. We've used that at FedEx during my tenure, and I retired 2 years ago. We've used it year in, year out, and I believe that's one of the reasons why FedEx year in, year out is seen as a great place to work and one of the Forbes 50 top places to work every year. So
Yeah,
that's a
that's
great
interesting. I've
success
heard you
story that I have.
mention a couple times now the term consequential thinking, and it's not really a term I'm overly familiar with. Do you mind telling me what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Consequential thinking is I made this choice in this relationship. Did I even think about what the outcome would be? A lot of people go on autopilot. They're out there, they're just living their life. They're making choices. They don't realize their choices impact others. With consequential thinking, you need to say, you know what? If I get up and yell at my kids every morning before they go to school and I sent them off to school and breakfast was rushed and we kind of went through it. Have I set their environment up to have a really great day of learning? Or have I created a bit of chaos that makes it even more difficult for them to engage in school? I go back to one of the other companies we worked with. We found out that when they would engage with their employees differently, that their first meetings were more a talk, listen, action. Hey, tell us what's going on. Let us have these observations. That we found their productivity went up significantly. That was a company we worked with in Italy called Amadori, and they just found out there was a great correlation to that leadership engagement of thinking, before I tell you what I need, let me find out what's going on with you, find out what you need, and then the downstream was a lot more productive to getting positive results.
It's interesting because, like, to an extent, some of this feels a little like squishy and like, oh, what do you need? And let me baby everybody. But I understand and appreciate that this ends up translating, right? It's like, look, if you tell me if you want your business to be effective, because you might be a hard pill to swallow, but you kind of need to, meet people at a certain emotional level.
You do have to meet people at an emotional level. You look at any research that's out there, and there's just tons of research. The average company can gain about 20% effectiveness, productivity, hard measurements of not having turnover, of being able to create larger ranges of spans of control. Because if a leader's more effective, a lot of times we're closing and having smaller and smaller groups and adding in leadership levels because they're not able to talk to it. So it becomes more of an accountability of people in seats and I watch over instead of saying these people can do their work. I'm going to have a leader that empowers them. So, we see smaller spans of controls. We also see the inability to create new product lines. It is squishy, don't get me wrong, but it's the right kind of squishy because it's squishy that can be measured, get results, and it creates a culture that really makes a difference.
Squishy, but the right kind of squishy is also how I'm described in a bathing suit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wish I could say I would describe better than that, but I'm probably even squishier in a bathing suit than you are.
Did I? Jeff, for anyone that's just listening on audio, Jeff's face is like, dude, I don't know how to answer
No,
that.
what I was thinking about is you live in California on the coast. I live in Miami on the coast, and too often we're squishy people out on the beach. It's not like we're in Minnesota where we look good in those fluffy coats.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I put enough layers of
that's
coats on, you can't
yeah,
tell.
yeah, that's where my mind went to. I don't get to cover up very much, so sorry
That's
about that.
good. That's good.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if there's anything that you believe, within your expertise, an HR person, might be good to get on the conversation that we haven't touched on yet.
Yeah, I think from an HR perspective, it really helps to have these understandings and to have the ability to take this emotional intelligence and marry it with artificial intelligence. If you're an HR professional, a lot of times you're seeing your platforms, you're having your work days, your other CRMs or whatever systems you're using, and it's just spitting out data. And it's a lot of analytical data. And a lot of times as an HR person, we're just passing along the data. Well, hey, here's what the groups were, here's what our numbers are, here's what the data says we should be actually at our staffing models. And that's really just numbers. And then when we start to look at that is say, okay, what do the people look like in those numbers? So if you start saying from an HR perspective, hey, at this span of control, we can only have 15 managers in this area. And if you're not communicating them and you don't have good quality communication, you may have to add a couple more managers in those roles just to control the environment and it becomes a more compliance driven. Well, if you can say, you know what, we're going to hold firm on this number of 15 managers, we're going to add four or five more people below them that are really out touching the customers. If it's a call center, those people are making the calls, those are handling it every day. But if we make that level even more efficient, then we can spend our dollars where they really touch the greatest customer experience. Very rarely in an organization do your managers and your secondary managers ever create the customer experience value that a lot of people are paying for.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it all if you can tie the AI, the artificial intelligence and the most emotional intelligence and put the right people where the value is, that'll make all the difference in the world.
But you're putting the EI and AI.
You're putting the EI and AI. And if you think about it this way, there's a certain level of problems. If you're working with a call center, there's a certain level of problems AI can solve immediately. It's a transactional call. Hey, my package isn't here. We put that level there, but in the difficult areas where a person needs to say, you know what, I appreciate the struggles you're going through. I hear you. We're going to solve this problem. We're going to work through it. But they learn to speak at an emotionally empathetic level. Um, you get a call somewhere, the first thing you hear is just a script. And it doesn't matter what you're saying to that script, as long as that call center person's on that script, they're getting rewarded, but the problem's not getting solved. So in those kind of instances, if we can teach them to, wait a minute, take that pause. And that's why we call this 6 seconds, is because that's how long it takes the amino acids in your body to start either settling down or processing information. They call it the fight or flight response. So if you can take that quick pause and you learn to take the pause and pull off of autopilot and go into a really the consequential thought that we talk about or a planned thought to solve a problem, we believe that creates a ton of value and it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree because there's a lot of data too on parts of the brain that just shut down sometimes. So if the approach is wrong, you literally the person you're talking to can't even access the certain parts of their brain that might be a good critical thought.
Yeah, I'm the worst. I am the worst on the phone. If I get a person that keeps saying the same thing back to me, or they say, "Hold on, we're going to put you on another call," by the second time that happens to me, I've lost my mind. I'm screaming. Okay, I'm an emotionally intelligent person for the company, not always the most emotionally intelligent on the telephone. I just lose my mind because I don't want to repeat it. I don't want you to give me a pat answer. I want you to just solve my problem and listen to me.
Yeah.
But 100% agree with what you just said.
Yeah, and I think maybe employees feel that way sometimes too, right? Towards their managers. I just want you to solve my problem.
Yeah, yeah. I just asked for a day off, man. Can you just tell me what's going on? Did I get it? Didn't I?
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I always laugh when I was in management. I would tell people, hey guys, at this company, they're not talking about our CEO. They're talking about you because you didn't give them the day off and their family didn't get to go play at a football game on a Saturday. That's what they talk about at their dinner table, not what our stock price is.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of boil it down to those simple complexes and make emotional intelligence that simple. Sometimes it feels like emotional intelligence, oh, it's shrouded. What is it? You know what? Simply, it's just doing the right thing for people when you have a chance to. That's my best takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's a great closing thought, and I appreciate you, Jeff. Thank you so much for being on. Truly, it's a great conversation. I appreciate you. If people want to get a hold of you, LinkedIn, email. How do we get a hold of you?
Yep, LinkedIn, I'm there. Jeff Kinsley at LinkedIn, email jeff.kinsley at 6seconds.com, and love to talk to you. And Toby, this has been great, man. You've been a blast, so I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining us. That's all the time we have this week. Thank you to our sponsors, Excel Health, True Hue, Rula, Montage Insurance Solutions. Thank you guys for listening. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.